All right. Hello and welcome to the Adobe Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Adobe. My name is Terry White, Worldwide Design and Photography Evangelist for Adobe, and it's my pleasure to take you on part 5 of Introduction to Photoshop CC. Today we're going to talk about the Camera RAW adjustments and the Camera RAW filter and what's Camera RAW and when do I use one versus the other, and how can I take advantage of this great thing, and I'm afraid of Camera RAW and I don't get Camera RAW, and so forth and so on. So this is, again, intro, so it's for beginners. It's for people that are either new to Photoshop or really haven't used Photoshop a lot. And again, today's topic deals a lot with RAW adjustments. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean anymore that it has to be a RAW file. And I'll explain the difference as we go forward. Now, for those of you who are new and you say, oh, I can't do this because I only have a point and shoot, or I only have a camera that shoots on JPEG, you don't have to worry about that. That's the whole point of today, is that what we're going to be doing is, does it still say that? Hang on. No, it doesn't. Okay, good. Thanks. I was going to say, no, it doesn't on my end either. All right, but anyway, don't have to worry about it if you don't have a camera that shoots in RAW. This has nothing really to do with cameras. This is really about adjusting your images using the power of Camera RAW inside Photoshop CC. All right, so let me, I hadn't had time to switch gears here. Let me get Photoshop up and running here. And also, let me do one more thing, and then I'll show you guys my computer. Actually, let me go back to Lightroom. That'd be easier. One more second here. And let me show this in the Finder. Perfection. All right, not a good shot. I'm just looking for a good picture to start off with. Not a good shot. It's an okay shot. All right, hang on. We'll use this one no matter what. All right, I'll stop being picky. All right, and let me go to Photoshop and go back here. Perfect. All right, so let's switch gears here so you guys can see what I'm doing. And so I've got Photoshop CC open in the background, and I've got my operating system, my Finder, open here, where I've got a folder of images. So I'm going to show you what Camera RAW is for those of you who are photographers, and then we'll talk about what the Camera RAW filter is for those of you who are not photographers. You don't have RAW files, you don't have a camera that shoots in RAW, but you still want to take advantage of Camera RAW. So in the past, Camera RAW was originally designed for people that wanted to work on photos completely 100% non-destructively. You wanted to make adjustments to photos, basically raw files or negatives, and you wanted to do so in a way that never harmed the original. So, for example, I found a folder. These are some pictures that I just found that hadn't been converted yet to anything else. So these are all raw files coming off one of my old cameras back in 2006. And so these are NEF files. Now, what's an NEF file? I don't know. It's actually a Nikon RAW format. So every camera manufacturer that provides a camera that shoots in RAW has their own proprietary RAW format. So Nikon, it would be NEF. Canon would be CR2. I think for Sony, it's ARC or AR something. I can't remember anymore. But everyone has their own. Fuji has their own. Olympus has their own. So it doesn't matter what camera manufacturer you have. The vast majority provide their own proprietary Camera RAW format. Now, there are some that provide a format that's more universal called DMG. So, for example, I mentioned it on my last stream, like if you're using one of the new DJI Phantoms that has a camera built onto it. These are the flying drones you see everywhere. Those cameras can shoot in RAW, and DJI didn't bother creating a RAW format. They just adopted DMG instead. And so that way they have a non-proprietary RAW format that their camera outputs from scratch. But regardless of any of that, whether it's proprietary or not, if the camera is supported in Photoshop's Camera RAW or Lightroom or Camera RAW in general, then that means you can work on those images non-destructively. So for example, if I double click, oh, hang on, sorry, I didn't set, no, don't open in Elements, no, sorry, I haven't set my RAW files to open in a particular program yet. So let me do it this way. This is because I never do it this way. This is why this one threw me. I never double click on RAW files. So let's do it this way. Let's set it to Photoshop, change all. Yes, I'm sure. Okay, now let's double click. And what that will do is open it up in Photoshop, but before it goes to Photoshop, it says, I'm going to stop and open up the Camera RAW adjustments first, and then you can either just make your adjustments here in Camera RAW and save, or continue into Photoshop to do more. So that's the big distinction of how Camera RAW has always worked on RAW files. If you double click on a RAW file and you've got your program set to Photoshop or Bridge or whatever, it will open it up first in Camera RAW. This is the Camera RAW window, and then you can do whatever you want here non-destructively and decide what you want to do after these adjustments. So what can you do here non-destructively? Like I said, this is one window for all of the RAW adjustments. First and foremost, you have tools and eyedroppers and things at the top here. And again, know that no matter what I'm doing, whether it's working with the tools, working with the panels and the sliders over here on the right, or doing anything else, it's all 100% non-destructible, meaning I'm not changing a single pixel, a single piece of fur on that cat's head. It's all non-destructive. So you have to remember that. All right, so for example, if I decide that the color is off a little bit and I want to use the white balance eyedropper, I can, or his fur is gray. So for example, if I click on the gray, that will adjust the temperature of that photo and warm it up a little bit. Because what you're looking for something in your photo is something that should be around 18% gray. You won't always have that option. Sometimes you're taking a photo of something, like for example, if I just took a photo and the cat wasn't there, there's nothing in this photo that's gray. You won't always have something that you can magically click on. That's why there's a temperature slider for when you don't have something to click on with the white balance eyedropper. Or if the white balance was set properly but doesn't look right, meaning it's still too warm, still too cold. You can still manually override that adjustment with the temperature slider, make it very cold or make it very overly warm, which we don't want either one of those. I kind of liked it where it was. So if I go back to that eyedropper and click again on his gray nose, oops, I clicked in the wrong spot that time. Now see this, if you don't click in the same spot, you're not going to get the same results. Okay, so that's a better result. That looks like kind of the warm temperature that I would expect to be in this room. Now the other thing is, there was no flash. It was just the light coming in from the window, and it's not properly lit. This was just a snapshot. It wasn't something designed to be a photo shoot. So in this case, I might want to bump up the exposure. So I can switch over to the exposure slider and just slide it and lighten this photo up. I also noticed that it's slightly out of focus. Again, because it was a dark room, the shutter speed probably wasn't fast enough to lock this in. So I could go in and do things like, I want to do in detail, I can adjust the sharpening of this photo. So I can sharpen it up. It's not going to make a blurry photo completely sharp, but it will certainly add some sharpening to it to make that photo look better. Now, it's adding a lot of detail to the fur, but his eyes still aren't quite in focus the way I'd want them to be. But that's okay. I can still do more. I'm going to go in now, for example, and zoom in. Let's grab our zoom tool. There we go. And see, yeah, it's just an out of focus photo. There's not a lot I can do about that. But if I go to my adjustment brush, the adjustment brush has something called contrast, sharpness, and clarity. You can use any combination of those you want. So I like clarity for something like this. I can bump up the clarity a little bit and make a non-destructive adjustment in a specific area of the photo. kind of just sharpen that up a little bit more. So these are the kinds of things that people will do with Camera Raw. Now, I know I'm jumping around. Don't worry about that. We're going to take our time and go back through a lot of these. But I'm just showing you what's possible right here with making these adjustments. Now, if I zoom back out, and we go back out to the full frame there, I can look at what else I want to adjust. Well, that chair doesn't look very straight. So I can use the straighten tool, and I can say that, you know what, I would love to straighten the chair along that edge. And it will automatically straighten the chair along that edge, and all I have to do now is get out of it, because once I open it, it will be straightened. So I don't have to do anything more. It won't show it to me straight, but I see the crop rectangle that's what the straightened image will look like once I'm done. So I can go in and continue working on this, and if I like it the way it is, and I'm done with it, I could just say save image. I don't ever have to go into Photoshop. If I say save image, I get my choice of how to output this. What do I want to do with that RAW file? Well, I want to make a JPEG, or I want to make a TIFF file, or a Photoshop file, whatever. And whatever formats, or I'm sorry, not only whatever format, but whatever size you want, whatever you want, however you want to output that file. Or I can just say, I'm done. Now, there's open image and done. What's the difference? If I say I'm done, the image goes away. Well, why did it go away? Because, well, I said I was done. Well, what did that actually do? If we go back out and look at the image now, we'll notice two things. We'll notice that there's a file, which is the one we actually double-clicked on. But right below that file is a file called .xmp with the exact same name. And notice the timestamp on that. It just happened a minute ago. When you're making these adjustments to your RAW files, especially proprietary RAW files, we're not touching that RAW file at all in any way. That's the original RAW file untouched. All of the adjustments you make in Camera Raw are made to the metadata, which in this case is stored in this XMP file. So whenever you open up a RAW image in a program that understands RAW, it looks to see if there's an XMP sidecar file, that's what they're called, and it will apply all the adjustments to it. So it visually looks like what you did, even though it physically didn't make any changes. So if I go in and double click on that again, it's going to open right back up in Camera Raw, and it's going to open in with, this time, with all the adjustments, including the crop, including the straightening of the chair. It has everything I've done to it, including my exposure adjustment and everything else. So that means I could then go back and say, well, you know what? It was too exposed. When I printed it out, it was too bright. I want to drop it back down. I can undo anything I've done because this is all non-destructive. If I go back to the crop, I can uncrop it. I can turn it back around and go back to the way it was. I have not lost a single pixel. I have not touched a single pixel. So that's what Camera Raw was originally designed for photographers to do their work without making any adjustments that would be destructive to their photo. For those of you who want a traditional example, back in the film days, for those of you who remember film, you would load film into a camera, snap some exposures, take the film out, and have it processed. When you had your film processed, you had two choices. Just give me back the negatives, or give me back the negatives and the prints. In the digital world, the difference is when you have a camera that can shoot in RAW, you're saying the RAW file is the negative. That's what came out. That is, you can always make more prints from, you can always make more JPEGs from, you can always do things to it that never change the negative. That's what the RAW workflow had simulated from the traditional camera days. All right, so that's what this would allow me to do. Now, if I am happy with my adjustments, but I now want to do some compositing, I want to remove the background, I want to do some cloning, I want to do things that Camera Raw doesn't do, then I can say open image. And it will open the image up as processed into Photoshop, and I can do more. So for example, I could say I want to go in and remove that design from the chair. So if I go in here and say that, you know what, I don't like that design, let's grab our patch tool, and let's go up to the top here, and let's take this design, and I'm doing it, hang on, I'm doing it the hard way. Let's take this design, and content aware patch it out. Well, I might not be able to get it all in one swoop, but you get the idea. All right, oh, we did get it all in one swoop. Okay, so now the design's gone. Now I have physically edited those pixels. I've changed something about that photo. Whether you make a layer or not, you're still changing pixels. All right, so now I've got this changed, and I'll go to save it. Now notice the format that I opened in still says NEF, because that's what it originally did open it from. But now the minute I hit save, it cannot save over that NEF file. It's got to make a new one. It's got to make a new file in whatever format you want, but it will never touch that original negative by default. So I can save it as a PSD, a JPEG, a TIFF, whatever you want, but now I'm working with a new file that has those pixels altered. The original one is still unaltered. That was, you just saw the entire Camera RAW workflow from scratch. So opening up a raw file, making adjustments to it, just saving those adjustments as metadata, or opening that image up in Photoshop to do more to it, and then exporting out a different file. So now if we go back to our folder, we've got that particular file and the PSD, which I just made, with its edits. So we have 1528, which is the original RAW, 1528's edits, which are just metadata, and 1528, the Photoshop file. Now let me ask you guys a question in the chat. Let's see if you're paying attention. Let's close this Photoshop file for a second. And now you're going to get a Twitch test. All right, guys, you guys still with me? If I throw away this 1528.xmp file, and then after I throw it away, take it out of this folder, get rid of it, and I open back up that NEF file, what will it look like? So let's see what you guys say in the chat. And while you're doing that, I'll take a drink. All right, is this thing still on? Is anyone there in the chat? I know it's a delay, but let's see if you guys are answering. All right, I see it now. My chat window wasn't updating. Everyone's chiming in with the right answer. Let me reopen my chat window. And you're absolutely right. It will look like the original. It will look like the original one that wasn't rotated, wasn't changed, wasn't altered in any way. It'll go right back to when I first double-clicked on it in the very first time. So XMP is the metadata, all the adjustments you made to the file. The NEF is the original RAW file, and the PSD or TIFF or JPEG is the processed file that you went into Photoshop and did things to that are potentially destructive. Now, one last thing, and then we'll switch gears over to the non-RAW workflow for everyone else. If you have a DMG file, like we worked on DMG earlier today, 15, 16, 17, okay. Notice that the DMG files were updated today, but their XMPs were updated back on April 15th, 2015. I'm going to throw away these XMP files now. I'm going to get rid of them. Yep, delete them. Now I'm going to double click on this DMG file. All right, badly out of focus cat. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and make some adjustments. I'm going to bring down the exposure or up the exposure a little bit, and we'll increase the blacks, and we'll increase the vibrance, and I'm just going to say done. Notice what happened. There is no XMP file, and now it was updated just now. That's because the other advantage to working with DMG, as opposed to your camera's proprietary RAW format, is there is no sidecar file. The non-destructive metadata changes are stored in the file. So that's one more example of why I love DMG, is because I just have, number one, smaller files that take up less space. If you look at them, these are only 6.4 megs versus 7.7 megs for the same NEF files. So not only did I save disk space, but I'm also saving from a clutter of all these XMP files that just have the metadata. It's still, if I double click on this, and I go back to these settings, and I zero them all out, and I don't make any changes or just reset them back to their original state, then I will still have the original file. I'm not changing the file, whether it's DMG or RAW. All right. So Photoshop CC can't open a RAW file. It can, but it has to go through the RAW processor first. It can't save changes to a RAW file because that would defeat the whole purpose of RAW. Can you open other file formats in Camera RAW to edit them? Yes, and that would have been the old way to do it. So for example, if we were to go in, and this is a convoluted way to do it, but you could have gone in before and you could have said open. And I can pick the Photoshop file, which is not a RAW file, obviously, and I could then say, and I've almost forgotten how to do this. I could then say open, choosing Camera RAW and opening it that way. And that will open the PSD in Camera RAW. The reason you don't need to do it this way anymore is coming up in just a second. I just want to get all the questions done first. But yeah, you can open up a JPEG, a TIFF, in RAW, but you don't need to do it that way anymore. Okay, looks like I got everything answered. If I missed your question earlier because my chat wasn't refreshing, just ask it again. I didn't mean to ignore your questions. I just didn't see any until I refreshed the window. All right. Okay. So the reason I said you don't need to do it this way anymore, and let's get out of this, is because in Photoshop CC, I think it was the first version. Yeah, Photoshop CC back in 2013. We added something that made the whole reason for Camera RAW to exist that much better. You don't have to, A, you don't have to work with RAW files. B, you don't have to even do the convoluted way of opening them the way I just did by telling it to open in Camera RAW first. You don't have to do any of that anymore. And also, you don't have to have a camera that shoots in RAW anymore if you want to just take advantage of the power of RAW. So let me explain the process. I'm going to first open up some files here. Let's go in and go to my demo files here. Actually, my CC demo files, Photoshop, and these are all good. I don't know which ones of these I'm going to use yet, so I'll just open them all. All right, the ones I'm opening now, none of them are RAW files. So now we're at the stage of this stream that this applies to everyone. Doesn't matter what kind of camera you have. Doesn't matter if it was a camera. It could have been a scan. It could have been anything else. And I'm just going to say don't resolve these for now. Okay, let's go here. All right, I've used this example in the past because it's a great example for working with Camera Raw in a situation. A, it's not a raw file. B, you're a designer, you're a photographer, you're a whoever, and you just want to use Photoshop non-destructively. And C, you have the power of Camera Raw without having to know how to open up a file in Camera Raw. And lastly, D, I guess, is that it doesn't have to be the entire image. It can be a layer. And what I just showed you in the first 30 minutes here, or 28 minutes, is that everything I did in Camera Raw was global to the entire file. Now, yeah, I could use the adjustment brush on the eyes, and that just applied to the eyes. But in other words, I have to open up the whole file and do something to the whole file or individual pieces of it. Here, I'm in a layered PSD file. I'm in a Photoshop document that has layers. So there's a type layer, there's another type layer, there's a tint icon, and then there's a layer group of those layers. All those layers put together make up this feed video. I want to make an adjustment just to the background. I don't want to make an adjustment to anything else. The adjustment to the background is the one that's needed because it's too blue. There's a blue color cast on it. So I want to just, let me answer this question real quick. When you worked on the NEF file earlier, why didn't its date change to today? That's a good question, and that's the whole point of RAW. I didn't make any changes to the RAW file. Every change you make in an NEF, it can't be made to the RAW file. It's being made in the XMP. That's why the XMP date changed and the RAW file didn't, because I didn't save any changes to the RAW file. That's because it's non-destructive. It's a RAW file. Not making any changes to it, therefore the date won't change. All right. So anyway, back to this. So we've got this background which is overly blue, and that's where I want to make my changes. So if I go up to my filter menu, and this was introduced in Photoshop CC, there is now a filter called Camera RAW filter. And when I do use the Camera RAW filter, it brings up the Camera RAW window and lets me make 99% of the adjustments that I would be able to make to a RAW file. Before I open that up, let me explain one more thing. Why do we have that filter built in? If I wanted to make this less blue, I could use any traditional method. I could go up to my image menu, go down to adjustment, I can go to levels and curves and try and mess around in there and get it to be less blue. So if I go to curves and I go to the blues, and I maybe, I don't know if this will work or not, but I kind of pull that down, it's messing with it, but it's messing with it in a bad way. I could eventually get that to look right. And this would have been the method, you would have done it better, but this would have been the method that people have used for years. Levels, curves, other adjustments, other things. And for a new user, looking at this dialog box alone, you would have no idea what to do with this. And why is it called curves? What does that even mean to a new user? So Camera RAW has one advantage over every other adjustment in Photoshop, besides the non-destructive nature of it. It's easy. Camera RAW is so easy because it's all sliders. There's no figuring out what some weird interface from 1996 does. And I hate to say it, but that's what curves and levels are. They're interfaces from the 90s. I don't have to worry about that anymore because I have a much more modern, easier way to do it. So I'm going to show you two ways. Let's do it this way first. Filter menu, Camera RAW filter, boom. Brings up the Camera RAW filter, but notice what it didn't bring up. It didn't bring up gear, adventure, the video frame, didn't bring up any of that because Camera RAW filter applies to a layer. So it's only applying it to that background right now, nothing else, because the background is what I had selected. So now I'm in the same Camera RAW interface that we were in a minute ago, all the same sliders, 99% of them anyway, and I can do the exact same things that I was doing before. For example, if I want to adjust the temperature of this tint to be warmer, I can just slide it over and have it be warmer. But my favorite way to do it whenever possible is to use the white balance eyedropper. I love the white balance eyedropper because usually it's 1 or 2 clicks to fix a color cast problem. So if I go to this first eyedropper, which is the white balance tool, I click on it, and I'm looking, again, in the photo, I'm looking for something, even though it's not gray now, I'm looking at something that was supposed to be gray. That's the key message that I want to get here. When you're looking for something to click on, you're not looking at the bad color that it has now, you're looking at the color that it's supposed to have. So I'm pretty sure the bottom of this tint, even though it kind of looks bluish green, was supposed to be gray. So if I were to click on it, it fixes it in 1 click. I don't have to think twice about it. It's done. I don't have to think about what slider do I need to drag, how far over do I need to drag it, or any of that. 1 simple click fixed my white balance problem. Now, in the case of proper white balance doesn't necessarily always look good, because sometimes, especially when you're dealing with people, skin tones are very important, and setting the proper white balance still may make a person look too blue or cold or too warm or yellow. So that doesn't mean that clicking is going to be magic every single time. It just depends on the file you're clicking on. So in this case, if it needed to be warmer or needed to be cooler, I still have the ability to make a finite adjustment on it, final adjustment on it, dragging it to be maybe a little warmer than what proper white balance was set to. Now, I can click OK and be done, but if I want to make other adjustments while I'm here, I've got all these non-destructive, or I shouldn't say non-destructive yet, all these easy adjustments I can make. So if I wanted to adjust the exposure in addition to the white balance, I can bring it down a little bit. Maybe it's a little too bright. Bring it down just a hair. If I want to brighten up part of her face where she's kind of like in the shadows, I could use the adjustment brush, which also has its own setting for exposure. And I could, first of all, zoom in and then go to the adjustment brush and then go in and set everything else to 0. Just want to make sure everything else is set to 0. That I don't want to be affected. Contrast 0. Okay. I can go in and say that, hey, I want to brighten up her face just a little bit. Now I'm painting. Here, we'll do it this way. I'm painting on her face, and I don't see much of a change because I'm only doing a slight adjustment. If I want to adjust the exposure up a little bit, I can. Now, I also had a very big brush that was painting outside of her face. So if I want to go in now, hold down my Option or Alt key. I can take it off the sky and go in and make that adjustment. Now, I still have the one adjustment, so I can make that part of her face darker or brighter as an adjustment with the adjustment brush. Very easy to make these adjustments, very easy to do this. Okay, next. Now, I haven't seen anything happen in my chat in a minute, so let me refresh this one more time. Hope I'm not losing any questions here. Oh, here. All right, and sorry if I missed your chat earlier, but just go ahead and ask again. I just refreshed my chat window. All right, so now let's say I'm done and I click OK. Those adjustments have been made to that layer. But here's the caveat. Those adjustments have not been made to that layer non-destructively. They've altered the pixels of that layer. Oh my God, what? No, yes. Because here's the problem. When you make, and so for the person that just chimed in, hey, I missed the beginning of this. How did you open the layer in Camera Raw? I have to turn the pic into a smart object? I don't get why. Okay, so both of those are good questions. So the person that said they missed how I got that in the Camera RAW, and someone said something about smart objects, I'm about to answer both of those right now. And hang on, let me pop this chat out one more time. Okay, so those adjustments were made non-destructively, meaning I can still undo, but once I save, that's it. There's no going back to changing or slightly altering what I did, because the Camera RAW filter is a filter like every other filter. If you run blur on a layer, it's going to blur the layer. If you run distort on a layer, it's going to distort the layer. It's going to do everything you told it to do, unless you protect yourself first. So let me undo it first. Undo. Put it right back to the way it was. So this will get back to the person that said, how'd you get into that? Secondly, for the person that said, someone told them about smart objects first. What do they need to do? So notice the background is a background, or all of these are just layers. There is an option you should run first before you use the Camera RAW filter. Under the filter menu, there is the very first option, convert for smart filters. You should do that first. Here's why. When I say convert for smart filters, it will, if it's a background, it'll convert it into a layer. And number two, it'll make it what's called a smart object. We have a whole session coming up on smart objects and working non-destructively. So I'm going to save the broader explanation and more examples for smart objects till that stream. But just say in a nutshell, a smart object is a wrapper for your layer. So it protects, so think of I'm going to coin the term, think of it as Tupperware for your layer. It puts a protective seal on it. You can do stuff to, like you can write on the Tupperware, you can write your name on it, but it's not affecting what's inside. So think of a smart object as a layer of protection to a layer. You can work on what's inside of it, but everything you do to that smart object doesn't touch the pixels of the actual contents of it. So by converting it to a smart object allows me to have the ability to work non-destructively on any particular layer. So now that I've converted that to smart filters, now we'll go back to the first thing. How do you do this? And how do you color cast? And blah, 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 blah. Filter menu, Camera RAW filter. Go right back to where we were. We'll grab our eyedropper. We'll click on something that should be around 18% gray, like the bottom of this tint. Boom, it fixes it. We can go in and make any other adjustments we want. So I can do that same thing where I zoomed in on her face. And I use the adjustment brush to, and here we'll make that brush a little smaller. And we'll just use the exposure adjustment to make her face a little bit more exposed. Okay. And we can zoom out, we can do anything else we want. So for example, I want that sky to be a little bluer. It's a middle of the day, sunny day. So why don't we grab our graduated filter, pull that down. And with the graduated filter, we can do anything we want. We can change the exposure of just the graduated area. Or I can say that I want to use the new dehaze on that area. So just take the haze out of the sky, make it a less hazy day. So now that I've done three things, I've adjusted the white balance, I used the adjustment brush on her face, and I used the graduated filter on the sky to dehaze. Once I click OK, it rendered those changes differently this time. It gave me the same result, but it now rendered it as a smart filter because that's a smart object. So I always have the ability to double click and go back into what I did to make more changes. I have not permanently made any changes to those pixels in that layer. It is a complete non-destructive workflow. I can always turn this adjustment off, turn it back on, double click to get right back into it, go right back into the the graduated filter, click on the graduated filter, and make more adjustments to it. Make it more saturated. Make the sky even bluer. And click OK. And again, I made the sky even a little bluer. I did not alter a single pixel in that. So that is the beauty of the Camera RAW filter and working with the smart, applying a smart object to it first, or applying a smart, what do they call it? Filter menu, convert for smart filters, which is basically smart object first. Now, as I showed you, the adjustments can be readjusted. I can go back and do more. I could always turn it back off. And now that this is a smart filter layer or smart object, I can go in and apply another layer or another filter. I can go into my filter menu, for example, and apply a path blur. Now this has nothing to do with Camera RAW, but I'm just showing an example where I can apply a path blur to this layer. Actually, I kind of like it going that way. And let's apply another one here. And let's simply turn that one down. All right, I don't need this blur, but I'm just showing it. I click OK. I apply that blur to this layer, which takes a second to render it. And now I've got two. I've got the Camera RAW filter. I've got the blur gallery filter, because both of those have been applied to that non-destructively. And I decided, what was I thinking? Oh no, it's too blurry. Turn off the blur. Everything else is still there. Throw the blur away if you want. You don't like the blur? Throw it away. Get rid of it. So I just have the Camera RAW adjustment now. Okay, continuing down our Camera RAW thing before we run out of time here. And next up, I think we have molten ink. All right. So, let's continue on. Let's try a different file. Let's go to this one. All right. So, for the sake of time, every other file I work on for the next 15 minutes, I've already converted to smart filters or converted to a smart object. So you'll see the little icon right there on each one, just to save the time that it takes to do it. So in this case, we have an adjustment that needs to be made, and this is for anyone going out shooting travel photography or just buildings in general, when you're not shooting something straight on. So in other words, unless you were in a helicopter or a high-rise building across the street, you're always shooting up at an angle or down at an angle. You're never shooting directly on unless you are directly in front of the subject. So when you are not shooting directly on, you will get this kind of distorted perspective where the building looks like it's getting skinnier, it's leaning, it's doing all kinds of weird things. So instead of me having to figure out in Photoshop all the various ways I could correct that, I always lean towards, I always think, can it be done in Camera RAW first? If so, that's always going to be the easier, best, fastest option. So if I go to my filter menu, come down to Camera RAW filter, then I go into my lens corrections, which is another tab. By the way, these are all tabs to work on in Camera RAW. So we started off in basic. There's tone curve. There's detail for sharpening. There's HLS for hue, saturation, lightness, and grayscale. There's split toning and lens correction. So now we're in lens corrections. And if I want to adjust the buildings, I can just use any of the presets. I can say, well, let me see what it looks like with a level conversion. Let me see what it looks like with a vertical conversion. Let me see what it looks like with a full conversion. Let me see what it looks like with an auto conversion. So my choice would either be full or auto, whichever one I like better. I kind of like full better. Click OK. And that's been applied now, but it's been applied as a Camera RAW smart filter. So if I ever want to turn that adjustment off, I can turn it off. If I want to turn it back on, I turn it on. So again, can you use smart filters with a TIFF file? You can use smart filters with anything. So if you can get it into Photoshop, as Boyfruit just replied, yes, you can use it on any layer, basically. No matter, the file format doesn't matter. It's applying it to the layer. All right, so next up, let's do, this is another example where I want to apply the same kind of effect. Again, it's already been converted for a smart filter. I go to my filter menu, Camera RAW. I go to my lens corrections. And in this case, I'm just, I'm going to try auto. I always try auto now right off the bat to see if I like it. And auto did make it better, but it did not make it perfect. Because while it made the adjustment as best it could, it still looks like it would have been better if the person had taken maybe 4 more steps over and shot straight on, or maybe 2 more steps over and shot the window straight on. So even though I chose auto versus nothing, or any one of these, I still can go in and use the transform controls to make further adjustments. So for example, I can go here and adjust it more horizontally. Kind of get it right there. I can also go up and maybe adjust it more vertically. I can lean it in a little bit more. So I can get that more straight on to my eye. Now notice that it's creating some white space because of the shrinking and cropping and things that, or not cropping, but the shrinking it's doing. Well, I can still go in and adjust the scale of it. So I can non-destructively scale it up just a little bit to fit that frame better and crop off the rest. So I click OK, and that adjustment's been made, again, non-destructively. So as long as I save this file as a layered file with those smart filter adjustments, I'm good as gold. All right, so here's a photo that I took way back when, up in near Grayling, Michigan, Traverse City, Michigan. And I took this obviously with natural light as a long exposure, and there was only one light, really not a light, but a window in the upper corner of this church, shining what little bit of light coming in that we had towards the end of the day. And I always thought, wow, I wish I could make this, I wish I could go back and shoot this, reshoot it. And now I don't have to anymore because of the abilities that I have inside of Camera RAW and the Camera RAW filter. So if I adjust the overall exposure, then it's just going to make everything brighter, but in some cases too bright. So what I want to do instead, and again, it's already been converted for a smart filter, I want to go in and go to my filter menu, Camera RAW filter. And in this case, I want to grab a fairly new addition to Camera RAW, which is the radio filter. So the radio filter and graduated filter are fairly new. And yes, adjustment layers are also non-destructive. And what I can do is I want to light up this little area first. And if I just drag out the radio filter, it's going to still be on whatever it was set on last. So here, thought there was a way to reset these. I guess not. At least I'm not doing it right. So I'm going to drag this out, and let's reset these to zeros first. And now we're just going to go ahead and adjust the exposure up. And last but not least, we want to do the outside. No, we had it right there the first time. Inside. Okay. Exposure. There we go. Now notice what's happening. You're starting to see writing on the wall that the sensor of the camera captured, but I could never see it because the exposure of this image was so dark. The other thing we take for granted nowadays is that in the past, even if you're going to run an adjustment like this, you'd render that adjustment out, and then if you want to make changes, you'd render it out again. This is live. I can walk around this room with this flashlight and light up any part of it. Oh, there's a bench there. I didn't know that. I can light up any part of this and see people kneeling down. Oh, no, just kidding. And see the writing on this wall here and make adjustments. So for example, if I wanted to tilt this and adjust it further, I can, because the radio filter just works that way. Now, the other advantage here is, in the past, if you were doing something like this, it would only be one. If you click OK, then you have to do it again. Well, I can apply as many of these as I want. So if I want another one right here, I can apply another one right here. If I want it to be bigger, it can be bigger. So I can light up various parts of this church. Or not even light up. Maybe that one doesn't need to be as bright. So let's take it down a notch. Because each one of these is adjustable independently of the other one. As you hover over the little pin, that lets you see the radius of the adjustment that it's going to make. Or it has made in this case. In this case, if I don't want that log to be as yellow, that's again a property of the sunlight, evening light that's coming in there. I can say, you know what, cool the temperature down on that a little bit, make that less yellow in that spot. So you can make these adjustments anywhere you want throughout using the radial filter. So what I use this for a lot of times in portraits is I just want to add a little bit more light to a person's face. So I just put a little radial filter right on their face, adjust the exposure just a hair, and just it looks like I add a little spotlight or a little flash right on the person's face using the radial filters. Well, it's not so much that it's just easier because with the adjustment layer you have older dialogues. It does more than adjustment layers. I have a lot more things I can do in Camera Raw than I can do with adjustment layers. But if you're happy with adjustment layers, rock on. Use adjustment layers. All right, so we'll click OK. And now those two adjustments have been made in that one Camera Raw filter, which I can turn the lights on and off whenever I walk into this building now. All right, next. And we got a few more minutes left. Let's check on this one. Okay, so one of the other things that was added, Camera Raw has always had a spot removal tool that was really designed for removing spots on your sensor, spots on your images, spots on dust on your photos. So if I go to my filter menu one more time here, we go to the Camera Raw filter. Thanks, Victoria. Glad you're liking the stream. And I go to my spot removal tool, which is this brush. What it was originally designed to do was, let me pick a good spot in the photo here. Let's say that this little dark spot wasn't really in the photo, something that got on your lens or dust on the sensor. You would, in the past, just click that spot, and then it would automatically, here we want to go ahead and do this clone. It would automatically go in and pick a different spot to pick up from. And you could move that different spot around to adjust what it gets. So that's what this spot removal tool has always done in the past. And that's what it was for. So for example, if I want to remove that spot, I just click, boom, it removes the spot. And again, it's doing all this all non-destructively. If I want to go in and take those out, I just delete them. And so that's what I mean by I can't do that effectively with adjustment layers. That's one of the things I was talking about. What's new is that the spot removal tool, that's why it's a brush now, doesn't have to be a spot. It doesn't have to be circular. So for example, if I want to remove this twig or bug or whatever this is, I can now paint the spot in the shape that I want that to be removed in, and that's what it will do. So now it'll pick up from that spot, and I can still adjust it moving around, but it looks pretty good the way it is. So whether it's little bitty spots that you want to click on or bigger areas that you want to paint out, you can. There we go. And so if I want to get rid of that one, I can. Although that one's giving me a problem. There we go. All right, so that is the, it's like Photoshop inside Photoshop. Not quite. It's a, think of it as, again, as a, you want to use Camera Raw and the Camera Raw filter as much as possible to be as non-destructive as possible. There are lots of things that Camera Raw can't do. That's why it's built into Photoshop as a filter. There are things that are faster to do in Photoshop. That's why you do those things in Photoshop. But if it can be done in the Camera Raw filter, you want to do it in the Camera Raw filter because that will always be a non-destructive way to do things. And again, we're going to do a whole stream on working non-destructively and more on smart objects and all that. But this is one of the ways I wanted to point out since I listed this as one of the topics. All right, Renee, glad you're liking this as well. All right, so I click OK. And again, those spots have been removed non-destructively. So if I had done this with the healing brush, I could. But in order to make it non-destructive, to always be able to get back, I'd have to duplicate the layer first and then heal out the spots. And if I wanted to make an adjustment, then I have to go back to the previous layer and duplicate it again and do something else. So this way, I'm always able to get back to those spots. So if I go back to the spot removal brush, wrong brush, that one, I get right back to that same spot, those same areas that I adjusted before, and make more adjustments to them. So that's the difference a little bit also with duplicating a layer all the time and always working with a duplicate layer. You don't have as much flexibility in going back and fixing something you missed without reduplicating the layer again from the original and going back and making those kinds of adjustments. All right, I got less than 1 minute left. I'm glad you guys liked the stream. Sorry for those of you who are watching that had issues that we had with Twitch, dropping the connection sometimes. But thanks for hanging in there. And the recording did not stop. So if you want to watch the recording on my YouTube channel at terrywhite.tv, I'll have these posted probably later today or tomorrow at the latest. And those should be non-stopped because while the stream might have stopped, the recording didn't. So next up is Molten Ink, and I'll be back on Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern for whatever topic I come up from 10 to 11. And by the way, you can always suggest topics. And then, of course, we'll do Introduction to Photoshop Part 6. And whatever someone said I'll be doing on, on Friday for Part 6. I don't have the list in front of me. Actually, I do have the list in front of me. Let me go look real quick. And then we're going to turn it over to Molten Ink right now. But last but not least, real quick, the last thing is Part 6 will be replacing the background in your photos. So that's a big one. All right, guys, take care. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Cheers.